Greetings, everyone. It's Joe Driscoll here, back with my podcast, Salt City Grind. This is a very exciting episode for me. This one is a strictly selfish episode. I'm joined with the three Musketeers of lead prevention, the Holy Trinity of fighting lead in Syracuse. These three individuals on the show with me today. We've been in the trenches together for a number of years now. I'd say probably 2 years or so that we've been working together. And recently, I'll just to frame the conversation, recently Stephanie left her position at MBD, Neighborhood and Business Development in the city, and Katie left her position with home headquarters. And I just talked to Deb before we started, and she is mostly focusing on COVID stuff right now because of everything that's going on. So currently, none of us are really working on lead. But, I felt that this was such a long road that we fought together, that with the vote being on Monday, I felt like it was kind of like I wanted to recognize you guys and celebrate you guys because it was fun being in the trenches with you. So thank each of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we have with us Deb Lewis, who's with the Onondaga County Health Department, Stephanie Pasquale, who worked with the City Neighborhood and Business Development Department, which oversaw codes and business development, as the title would imply, and Katie Bronson, who worked with home headquarters, particularly the GHHI, the Green and Healthy Homes Initiative. So thank you all for coming on. I thought we'd try to do a little lead 101 as we get ready to vote on the ordinance that we've been waiting on for so long. So I'll punt to Stephanie first. If you could maybe let people know why lead poisoning is a problem. Give folks a quick summary of why we have to do something about lead poisoning and how lead poisoning remains such a persistent problem in Syracuse.
Thanks for having us, Joe. And I'm going to punt to Deb later about the science and developing brains and why this issue is so critical, particularly for addressing needs of young children. But I thought I'd frame sort of the scope of the problem and maybe how we all got involved in this partnership together was around this intersection of housing and healthcare, and this intersection of our aging housing stock in Syracuse in particular, and following the data to where the most risk and the most prevalence of cases would be, to see in which ways in our various roles that we could address this issue. So Syracuse has 66,000 housing units. That's a lot, of which 60% are rental. And over 96% of our housing was built before 1980 and likely contains lead-based paint. Now, every home, I live in one of those old houses you can see in my background. There's lead paint behind me, I'm sure, in these windows. But it's how the property is maintained and whether there's an exposure there based on sort of the quality of that maintenance and whether or not there's friction surfaces happening. So I think why this issue is so prevalent here in Syracuse is this sort of perfect storm of aging housing stock that can be costly to fix, as well as low home values in some of our neighborhoods. So, getting landlords and property owners to be able to access financing in order to make those necessary repairs sometimes can be really challenging, as well as just raising awareness about the issue and the degree to which this is preventable. And I think that was a common theme that brought everyone together, not just the four of us, but our whole group, is that this work and is in the impact of lead hazards is entirely preventable. As long as we're willing to, all of us, roll up our sleeves, dig in and figure out some creative approaches to addressing this issue. So I thought I'd just frame sort of where we are with housing in the area, and happy to answer any questions about, the quality of housing and how, in what different neighborhoods and different census tracts, why this problem is more prevalent than others. But overall, it is around this, connection between housing and healthcare, and how can we do a better job for our families.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Kate? I have a couple of things, actually, if I can piggyback on Steph.
Yeah, sure, Deb.
So I date our partnership long before 2 years or so ago. Stephanie and Katie and I were road tripping to different conferences about health and housing easily 5 years ago, right, Katie? I think 5 years ago is when we did the first trip out for a Green and Healthy Homes conference. And from the thinking that came out of some of those activities, it sort of gave us the right language and the science behind addressing the problem from a prevention standpoint, using the data that we each have in our own little worlds, putting that together and figuring out what we could do. And the what we could do really comes down to what does the city and county and the private sector have in their inherent authority? Like, what can you do and what's within your power to do something with? And then how do we figure out how to make that wheel roll through the community to bring people on board to support the ideas? Some of the ideas that came out of it were just getting in the same room together and really starting to hash out exactly that. And it started with a seed of an idea, and it's grown into a very large movement with a lot of additional energy coming from people in neighborhoods and family members and some standing coalitions and some other working groups that work on the nuts and bolts of housing code violations and health violations together to make sure landlords are doing what they need to be doing and owners are doing what they need to be doing. But this work, a lot of it happens behind the scenes. And so the visible face of it that people are seeing coming to fruition with the ordinance might be about 2 years old. But the work to get us here is much, much older, and often is the work that you don't hear about and see about because it's not pretty. It takes a lot of sitting down in rooms with people and hashing out over code books and rules and regulations and figuring out what we can do together to, ask codes to do something for health and health to do something for codes and GHHI to do something for everybody and coming to that compromise. It just took a lot of energy around that to get where we are today. And I really appreciate Joe being the champion on that, because really without that energy and consistency, we would not be at this moment, which is pretty powerful.
Awesome. And yeah, I didn't mean to imply you guys only knew each other 2 years. I just didn't want to claim any stolen valor like I'd been in this struggle for 5 years. I know you guys have been really driving this bus for years, and I as I came in was just so appreciative of all of you in your respective roles. So the next question I was gonna throw to Katie. Stephanie mentioned this is preventable. This problem is preventable. So maybe you could talk about, some of the high problem areas, some of the work you guys did with GHHI. What can landlords do, who own properties to try to avoid poisoning their tenants? What are good practices that we can do to reduce lead, in our community?
Yeah, I would say there are many ways you can prevent it. I think the ways we look at this the most is mostly through our friction surfaces. As Stephanie mentioned, windows. That's where they're opening and shutting the windows constantly, so it creates the friction, which creates the dust and puts that in the air for people to breathe. So identifying those friction surfaces, which often are the windows and doors. We were able at home headquarters, we were able to get some funding from the Central New York Community Foundation to address windows and doors in rental properties, because that was such a high priority, are those friction surfaces. And, you need to address those. And another important concept, and this is for landlords, this is for tenants, this is for homeowners, this is for everyone, is using the wet cleaning method. That is very crucial because, cleaning is important. Even today, where we're at right now, cleaning is important, and making sure that we wipe it down and use the wet method in order to address a lot of these hazards. I always like what Pat Strodel from Lead Safe says. He says, there's 4 main areas: windows, doors, porches, and floors. Windows and doors because of the friction surfaces, and porches because that's the main place people enter and come in and out, and then the floors because that's where the dust that ends up being on the floor. So it's both the friction surfaces cleaning, but I would also defer to Deb as well about additional like cleaning methods and ways to make sure people are preventing lead in their homes.
Yeah, and Deb, if you wanted to add to that, I also wanted to clarify something my wife brought up, that when we threw the lead fundraiser, we've got all these musicians in to come and play for lead, and they were all like, "We're gonna save the drinking water in Syracuse," and I was like, "No, man, I read the press release." Like we thought we educated, but a lot of people are confused when they hear us ranting about lead poisoning, that we forget that a lot of people think it's the water. And maybe you could just speak briefly, either Katie or Deb, about what role water pipes play and how much of it is the dust in the homes.
So, the thing about water is that the city is really rigorous about testing the water, and our water supply is really high quality. The city has not had an issue with lead in water for a long time, so much so that they're able to do testing at a longer interval under the EPA's regulation for that. So really, the most important thing to know about water and pipes in the home is that the water is affected by the distribution system inside the property. It's more about the pipes and the fixtures and the faucets that are inside the home than it is about the actual water itself. So it's very important for people who are living in older homes to make sure that, for a lot of reasons, because there is sediment in our water from hanging out in pipes, if the plumbing's never been updated, if there are old fixtures, there are other contaminants in the water other than lead that you want to flush out. You don't want to consume those things. So running cold water for a little while before you use it, only using cold water for drinking, making baby formula, and for cooking is important. You can't boil lead out of water, which a lot of people believe is true. It doesn't really help. And not using hot water, because that sits in the tank for a long time too and has other sediment in it. So run the cold water for a little while. That flushes out all of the stuff that's been sitting in the house over time and collecting inside the water and the pipes, and brings you in fresh, clean water from the city water supply outside the house, and that's much safer for you that way. Another quick thing is to take the faucet filter off, change the aerator inside your kitchen filter and your bathroom filter regularly, because that does collect some junk in there as well. So if you can take it out and clean it, rinse it out really good, or even replace it periodically, that's a simple maintenance thing that will improve the safety of your water.
Thanks, Deb. And so the next one was actually to you, Deb. I was gonna stay with you. So you mentioned that we're looking at this lead ordinance. The city is very hopeful to from the city's perspective with codes to change some of the ways we do things and be proactive. But as you've illustrated, the fight against lead has been going on for a long time before this. To maybe tell us about the status of the efforts with lead prevention with both the city and the county, and how we've been doing, and has there been reduction over the last few years, and how is it going in the city and the county?
I'm going to start kind of big picture and work in. So if you think about the number of children who are affected by lead in their home, the numbers in Onondaga County of children who have been negatively infected and have an elevated test result are around the same as what we see national trends showing for declining over time. So, a few years ago, we had thousands of children who had what would be considered an elevated test result, and the number continues to decline. Some of that is a result of better testing and sooner intervention. Some of that is a result of more education of our community. Some of it is a result of our partnerships and helping to extend the reach of the health department. Because if you think about how each of our little groups work, we all have our very specific thing to do. And when we share the thing that we do with other people and they help us do it, we're reaching more people, we're educating them more. Families are getting services more efficiently, and children are being tested more regularly, and that's really super important. Years ago, there was an ordinance that was passed, and it's a state law that requires children to be tested at age 1 and age 2. New York State as a whole has averages in the 60-ish range for testing at 1 and 2 consistently. Onondaga County does better than that. we still need to test more children. We need to improve continually to make sure that we're getting all the children who are considered at risk. And we're most particularly concerned with those young children because of their own behaviors. Little kids learn through exploring their environment and putting things in their mouth, including their hands and toys and other products. And some of those things are lead containing and some of them are lead contaminated, like dust in the household that gets on their toys and their hands can go into their mouth by their fingers or other toys and objects that they're playing with. And I've lost track of your question.
No, that's fine.
But really, I think where the intersection is of making sure that our partners are well informed about how to spread prevention messages and sharing tools with each other to make sure the community is getting consistent information from all of us. That's work that we've spent a lot of time on, especially in the last 3 or 4 years, to make sure that whoever is talking to some member of our community is hearing the same information from us. It's consistent, it's based in data and facts and based on sound public health practices like just cleaning, like Katie was talking about, using wet methods to wipe down surfaces, having your child tested at age 1 and 2, maintenance of the paint. And we're all saying the same thing, which is so important because it lessens the confusion in our community about who to ask a question about lead to and what they need to know to protect their family and their home.
Mm. So you kind of touched on something here, Deb, that kind of led to my next question. So maybe for the folks at home, we're talking about these 3 different agencies, but a lot of people don't know. You said, everybody's got their own little lane and everybody's got their own tasks to do. So maybe we could go through each of you and talk about, Stephanie, you could tell us a little bit about what MBD does. Katie could tell us a little bit about GHHI. And Deb could tell us about the Onondaga County Health. And maybe you start with Stephanie and just go through what each of these different agencies do and how you touch lead and how the different parts interplay with each other.
Sure. It's a tall order, Joe, but I think we'll knock it out of the park here. So neighborhood and business development, or the city of Syracuse, interacts with properties in a number of ways, but typically around some sort of service. So neighborhood and business development can provide financing through federal dollars or grants, loans, that sort of thing. But also through as you mentioned, the Division of Code Enforcement, and it's prior to the establishment of the legislation and all the research we've been doing over the years, it was a very reactive process. And what we're trying to get proactive, and we're trying to, the city follows the case, if you will, is the housing unit. And I'll throw words, the health department is following the humans. And so we really needed to marry that together to make sure that if there were ever repeat incidences, that we could use our powers of code enforcement and litigation and whatever we could bring to the table to ensure that any necessary repairs could be made. And I think that whether it's through funding or through, I'll call that the carrot, or through the stick of enforcement, it tended to be over the years a much more reactive process. And we're just really trying to get to that more proactive place where we're getting in the units before somebody's calling or before the health department says we got an issue with a unit that won't, reach compliance. I will say that what's complicated and where Katie can definitely chime in is that, all of these things we're talking about today are, if you picture a tool belt, there are tools in the tool belt. And not any one of those tools is the only tool. So we have to always be evaluating, looking at what is in our control, what we can influence, but also where we can't, how do we raise awareness and pull those levers so that we can have a holistic and comprehensive approach to this issue. So local government definitely can play a role, but it's limited in the sense of that sort of enforcement and how far you can take the enforcement. I think we all have to work together as a community around education and all the things you heard today. And I learned something from Deb and Katie all the time. We've been doing this a long time. In getting the education out there, but also making sure that we have those financial tools available so that when people are ready to make these necessary repairs, that people are trained properly, that there's construction firms that can do this work properly. And that's another area, really trying to build that contractor pool that we've all been working on to make sure that finally someone's ready to do the right thing and improve their property, making sure that they have a qualified, you know, a really good contractor and that's affordable to them that can get the work done.
Mm. Thanks, Stephanie. And so, Katie, if you want to go next with GHHI and maybe talk about the presence of GHHI in other communities and how the community foundation works in there as well, and then what aspects of lead you guys deal with at GHHI.
Sure. Well, GHHI is the Green and Healthy Homes Initiative for the greater Syracuse area. It is located at home headquarters, and that is where I worked for 4 years doing this work. And the intention of that program is to improve the health, safety, and energy efficiency of residents in the city of Syracuse. So it's very broad because we were identifying more than just lead with the health issues of GHHI, but lead became a focus because it was the topic that kept on coming up and the main concern for our community. And that is why we decided to do a lead poisoning prevention action plan that got all of our partners together and where we identified what resources we needed to do and what next steps we needed to do as well. And it was a great process because we had a lot of input, a lot of additional resources and partners involved. And we were, it was a step in the right direction so we could get to where we are today. So the GHHI Greater Syracuse program was really a point where we could get the partners together, create that health and housing connection, and really use all of our strengths so we could make the difference we need to make to improve the community and address the lead hazards in our community. Now at home headquarters has a lot of great services there in regards to home ownership education, and loans. And that's where the Green and Healthy Homes sort of played a part in because it had a grant program, but it also worked with a lot of our other partners, the loans at home headquarters, the Onondaga County lead funding from HUD, the City of Albany lead funding, Peace Incorporated with their weatherization assistance program. So it really sort of helped not only address one part of the house, but the whole house. So we were really working with all of our partners to say, okay, Onondaga County, you guys can address the lead. Green and Healthy Homes will address the asbestos, and then weatherization at Peace will make it a more energy efficiency house. So again, we're using all of our partners' strengths in order to make a better home. Now, Green and Healthy Homes Initiative is a national objective, and it's a national initiative. When I started, there were around 27 sites throughout the country, and they have been adding every year. We actually have quite a few here in New York. GHHI Buffalo was one of the first 10. There's also Utica. They have a GHHI site as well as the Capital Region. So that, and again, they have also taken lead as a high priority and concern for their community. So if you look at those other communities as well, Buffalo has an action plan and they've been addressing the lead issue. Utica has their lead-free MV. And, of course, there's Rochester, they've been on a different path, but they've also done a lot of this work as well with their lead coalition. But the main, approach is that, we as a community really have to address our homes and we have to address it together as a group. So we can't be working in silos anymore. And that was really the intent of the Green and Healthy Homes Initiative for the greater Syracuse area. And I believe it was such a success because of the partners we had at the table. I mean, it couldn't have been done without each and every one of you. And it made my job easier. So thank you. But it was, you guys are, I feel like Syracuse really has that strength and it shows.
Yeah, it was as someone as I said, I showed up in the fourth quarter, but it's seeing the around those tables, all the different, at the meetings we had where it was these big tables where everyone was talking about all the different stuff they were doing. It was such a great feeling of breaking down silos and great exchange of information and getting, each person sees it from a certain angle And so when we all get in the room and speak together, you get a full picture because they're seeing it from this side and they're seeing it from that side, and through it all, I felt like we got a whole picture. But one thing I just wanted to touch on before we move on to Deb, that lead action plan was absolutely epic. And for people who want to learn more about the lead issue, can you point people to where they'd be able? It's accessible online, right?
It is, yes. It's on the home headquarters website. So I know that's one location. I think the Central New York Community Foundation, with their initiative as well, they have a link to it, so you can find it there as well.
Yeah, if anyone is curious about like really getting a comprehensive assessment of where we are with lead and what's going on, that's a great collection of data from all the different sources, and all that different information really in one big report that I found was really helpful. My mother always said I'd be the first person who wrote a book without ever reading one. But I actually I'm rather proud of myself that I sat down with that one and really dug right through it. Got first page to last page, but I'm just cracking jokes. But Deb, why don't you tell us about how the county interacts with lead and what you guys are doing in your department?
Sure. Before we go there, though, you're being really modest, though, Joe, because the fourth quarter, we're about to go into lead overtime because the plan is just the beginning and the coalition is not gone. I'm listening to Katie, and she may have moved on to bigger and better, but the coalition is still around, and there's still some activity around that. We're a little bit on a pause, with COVID and the community and all of that, but there's still a lot of ongoing online conversation happening. There's still a need for people with passion who want to contribute and help to continue to move the needle on ending childhood lead poisoning in our community. And I think, I'm going to volunteer Joe as a connector to people who want to get into the coalition activity and how to reach out to the organizer of that group.
For sure. And if I could just say one thing, Deb, before we go, I just want to give a shout out to, you three are the ones that I associate with all this work in the years that we put in together. But a big shout out to Paul Chiavari. And in particular, he's working with a woman named Oceana Fair right now with Families for Lead Freedom. And they're really kind of coming into their own on a really, really good vibe with some of the stuff they're doing. So just wanted to shout them out as well. If people who are interested in getting involved with that work, reach out to me and I can connect you. But just wanted to give them a shout because they couldn't be here, but they are definitely very much partners that were essential to the vibe that we got going.
Yep. And there is actually a working task group that's starting to pick the plan apart a little bit and look for what's the next thing to work on. We kind of have the ordinance moving, but there are other things we need to do. We need to improve access to testing, and there are some other things in the body of that document that the task force is actively working on. So, definitely reach out if you want more information. So for the health department, one of the things that's a real misnomer for what we do is people think lead inspection, right? The kind of inspections that a health department does are really more of an exposure investigation. And that's one half of what we do with local health departments. We have a people side and we have a property side. On the property side, we're doing exposure investigations to identify where the hazard is and to require any of the owners of those properties to eliminate the hazard. So that looks a little different than when you're talking about someone that has a grant and they have a risk assessment and inspection to do a scope of work for funded work to do lead hazard reduction. They're very different things. And they're easily confused because people say lead program, and there are many lead programs. They each have very different functions. With the health department, besides the exposure investigation, we're looking at test results of every single child in Onondaga County every single day. And we're looking at between 10 and 12,000 test results a year. We accept them for Onondaga County, and then we're responsible for doing something with the information. For children who have an elevated test result, we have a requirement to provide education to the family, make sure that the child is receiving the appropriate follow-up services from their medical provider, and to monitor that child's care until their test result is below the state set threshold, and we can end our services. So we are with families for a very long time. to make sure that children are receiving appropriate developmental assessment, medical assessment, nutritional assessment, and repeat testing to make sure their test is not going any higher. Now, Stephanie referred to developmental needs of children who are exposed to lead, and that's really critical. Children who have a lead exposure are very frequently challenged by learning and behavior issues. They may have lifelong difficulties associated with that early exposure to lead that may not be identified until a child is well into their elementary and even early middle school years, because you don't often see the impact of those challenges until the part of the brain that's required to execute independent action and organization and some of the other things that you don't really see early on in children start to become more needed. So it can be hard sometimes for families to connect the dots between what's happening with their child now and that early lead exposure. Most important thing for a family to do is make sure the child is tested. If they hear from the health department that the child's test result is elevated, to stay connected with the provider and make sure their child is getting repeat testing and every evaluation known to them, and to keep being the greasy, noisy wheel to get what they need for their child in terms of developmental assessment and services. If they need support with that, our case managers who are working with the families can help to make linkages and connections to referral agencies and developmental supports for families. And that's part of our required activity under public health law. On the one side, families, on the other side, buildings. Sometimes families and buildings aren't a good match for each other. And if an inspector is doing an exposure investigation and they determine that that's not a safe environment for the family, one of the things that we work very hard with our partners on is trying to help the family identify safer housing and trying to help the family identify funding to move into safer housing. Those conversations are between the case manager and the child that's identified by their test result. And it's not something that people can just call us up on the phone and ask for. So sometimes it's also confusing for the community because people will call and ask for assistance with relocating. And what we do and how we do it is driven by the test results and by the requirements for how we follow the family through their experience with a child's test results being elevated.
Thanks, Deb. So I'll move to one that I had for Stephanie. So Stephanie, one of our favorite topics of conversation, Counselor Rudd has been rather critical of the Syracuse Codes Department. And as we look at this ordinance, you know, it is something that I share concern with, you know, about inspections and about, you know, getting into the interiors and stuff like that. You know, what are your thoughts about capacity? And I think we're all just really terrified now too, because COVID seems like it's going to, you know, we were before this whole thing, we were talking about $1 million increase to codes to help develop the test pilot for this. And now we're talking about 20% in cuts across the board for every department if the federal government doesn't get involved. But that conversation aside, that's a whole nother can of worms that we don't need to get into. But what's your thoughts generally about, you know, codes checking out places and how this potential legislation, you know, when you left, I was very panicked. I was like, oh no, the quarterback's leaving. Like we got the championship season going on. But you know, you are very familiar with the legislation. You're very familiar with codes. What are your thoughts about, you know, how this is going to get implemented and, you know, any insights you might have to Michael or myself, or, you know, thoughts about capacity and how we develop a more proactive approach?
Sure. I mean, this is incredibly complicated, but I will say, Joe, that, you know, the code enforcement team, they have incredibly challenging jobs to do. There's so many things. Their list is so long with periodic inspections and things most of the public, I won't bore you to tears with, but their checklists are long and distinguished in addition to these kinds of inspections. But what I will tell you is when I've been working in this field for a long time now, and getting to know Deb and the work of the health department, I know, I'll just speak for myself, it was incredibly frustrating that we didn't have the right to cite for the hazard. So think about that. We were this is prior to this legislation, in all these units, whether it was a reactive inspection or a rental registry inspection, and it's not on the books as a violation. It seems so backwards. And, Deb really opened my eyes, and in the work, as she talked about, the National League of Cities shared with us what other cities were doing. And we were part of this learning network to just figure out, what do you mean that's not something our people can violate for? So my answer to the question about capacity, or, that frustrates me, because if it saves one child or 5 children and 5 families, this is a necessary tool for the units we are getting in. Our code enforcement people for the last however many years are getting thousands of units a year. And this, now to have this, a lot of training is going to have to take place, and figuring out the mechanisms for that, if it does come up as a hazard. Certainly there's always room for improvement. That's the nature of the work. But to not even have the tool, so you can, if there's a hole in the wall, you can cite it for a hole in the wall, but you can't cite if you don't have the power to test for dust, and then you don't have the power to write, I'm sorry, this is a hazard and you have to fix it or else. That it makes me incredulous that there'd be any kind of, reservations about capacity. There are getting in the units. Is there room for improvement? Of course. This is hard stuff. And with funding challenges, it made it harder. But what I will tell you is that my forehead is bloody. I'm sure Deb's is too. We banged our head against the wall for 7 years in terms of giving this extra tool to our staff, or to the city staff, and I'm thrilled that they will have this tool. And I just hope that as new tools come online, as technology gets a little better to do inspections in the field and testing in the field, that this will just get better. And I'll just leave with the fact that the city of Rochester the University of Rochester did an independent study that showed a reduction in childhood lead poisoning by, I believe, 80%, not 8, not 18, 80. And that they directly correlate it with legislation like the one that's being put forward. So I don't have any qualms with, I think that's a fixable solution, is working through capacity. What you can't fix is a rule you don't even have on the books and you can't enforce.
But there's magic. There is a magic to the ordinance that I think is underappreciated by people who are not in the trenches like we are. And just for those of you who aren't as familiar with, well, why can't codes cite for that? So codes can cite for a lot of stuff. They can cite for peeling and chipping and deteriorated paint. They can't call it lead. They can cite for a hole in the wall that is allowing dust to come into the home that also we know contains lead, and they can't call it lead. The most important part of the ordinance is that it allows code enforcement to presume the presence of lead in properties built before 1978. We know the majority of properties in the city were built before 1978. Therefore, most of them contain lead, and most of the rentals, and especially the rentals in the more challenged areas of our city, are not in good shape. So if you think about what that means, just the change in language alone, and empowering a code enforcement officer to say, you must fix and repair that lead-based paint, because they're going to know, based on the presumption of the age of property and based on their training and visual assessment for lead-based paint, they can cite for lead just with that language change. Whether or not they ever pick up a dust wipe, whether or not they do anything else, changing the language that empowers them to cite for lead based on the presumption of lead paint and age of property is the most powerful part of the ordinance.
Oh man, you guys are making me so happy. Like, I just get so entrenched in, like, you just can't see the forest from the trees sometimes, and it's good to be reminded, because I think, so often I tend to focus on, I think like most of us, right? Like 20 people will tell you you're doing a good job, and one person will tell you that you're an idiot who doesn't know what you're doing. And you instantly forget about the 20 people that said you did great and only think about the one person who said you're an idiot. Not that's the case, but I feel like in this, it's like with the ordinance, so often we've talked about from my perspective in trying to get it there, spent so much time focusing on where the gaps will be or where the shortfalls will be or the ways it won't work, because you're trying to make sure that you that you're not leaving any blind spots. So all you're doing for me for the last year is looking for the blind spots that I might not be seeing, or the weaknesses or whatever. So it's really good to have this conversation with you three again, to kind of remember like why I started this journey to begin with, and got on the team with you guys. So Katie, I was going to throw the next one to you. When you guys do grants or did grants from GHHI, can you talk about like the amounts and how people qualified for grants, and what were the criteria for people who who might be out there who are looking to solve this problem in their homes? How would they apply? How did you do outreach to people? Some of those kind of issues about how did you find the people? How did they know to find you? How much would they get, and how did you decide who got the money?
Yeah. So with the Green and Healthy Homes Initiative for the greater Syracuse area, Home Headquarters received $1 million to work with homeowners to address health, safety, and energy efficiency issues. Now, with that funding, we were not a first. People did not come in first. They were actually referred from one of our partners. So that was Onondaga County. It was the city of Syracuse. It was Peace Incorporated. It was Home Headquarters programs that really brought in all of the applicants. The thing that I think that really came about from that program is the fact that we had a large menu of services and resources for people. And I think that is really the key when it comes to lead, because nothing is going to fit in a perfect box because every house is different. Every issue is different, and you have to take it and put it in the right box. So, for example, we had, again, the Central New York Community Foundation provided funding for windows and doors for landlords. So that was a great resource for people. We had the Green and Healthy Homes Initiative funding from the New York State AG's office, and that was for homeowners. But that was not just for lead, it was also for asbestos, it was also for radon, it was also for energy efficiency topics as well. And then we also had we also had a lot of other programs to help educate people, educate the contractors and landlords as well, getting the renovate, right, and repair training. So, with the funding, it was just one funding source with the Green and Healthy Homes Initiative, from the New York State AG's office. But again, because we were pulling from so many other partners and resources, it became a holistic approach. And we also were able to fit each project in the appropriate area. And, from that experience, I think it really identified the fact that all the homes are going to have different needs, and what program is going to fit for them is going to be different, and it's going to be a case-by-case basis, because we have some large properties and on Midland Ave that have 30 windows, and that's a huge cost. Or we have a smaller home, let's say in say another neighborhood, maybe in the West End, it only has 12 windows. Which program will that be? Well, it depends. Is it a homeowner or is it a landlord? And so and that's one of the great things about Home Headquarters and all the other partners we work with. We had so many menu of resources that if it didn't fit with the GHHI funding, we could contact one of our partners and see if it worked for them. And even moving forward, I think that's the approach we need to take, is the continued, multiple resources. The lead HUD funding is an excellent resource and such a great need for our community. But it's not going to fit every house. It's not going to be the best resource for them. There might be a different program out there. Same with the Central New York Community Foundation windows and doors. It didn't fit every property, but there, it was a great resource for the people it did fit for. So I think that was what, the intention of our GHHI Greater Syracuse program is to make sure we worked with the people and did what worked for their home.
Awesome. Thank you. And my next one will be to Deb. So Deb, if you could tell us, there was really cool. I don't know if you guys, if Katie and Stephanie were still around when CNY, when Community Foundation did that the different cogs of the wheel of all the different things that have happened in the last, 5 years or so, all the different pieces that are now coming into play, and this lead ordinance being the last one. I don't think in any way, Rochester kept saying to me, this isn't the finish line, this is the start line, which I definitely feel and take in. But there were a lot of victories to celebrate along the way. All of us took part in the support campaign for Assemblyman Magnarelli's legislation that added code blights to the tax rolls, and there were the DA threw his hat in the ring to say that he was going to prosecute people who were negligent, and aware of lead poisoning yet persisted. But one that I was thinking of, Deb could open up another topic of conversation, was the county executive's order around DSS money, and that if someone had a lead hazardous unit, that DSS money would be held back. So maybe you could talk about that relationship of landlords who are getting subsidies and trying to use that as leverage to get them to improve the quality of their housing.
Sure. So, one of the things that's been really important for this partnership and the effort that we're all knee deep in to work is the commitment of our leadership. And from the top down, city and county, and some of our community leaders have been 100% in support of moving the needle on childhood lead poisoning and using whatever is within their power to make change and to improve the lives of people in our community. And so, we had a mechanism for stopping rent one unit at a time that we've worked out with code enforcement. As a part of our collaboration with the city, we have ongoing meetings to look at properties that have a combination of code and lead violations. And we would troubleshoot monthly on those properties to see what was the next strategy. And out of those discussions came a mechanism to initiate a rent withholding one unit at a time. And when the county executive released his lead initiative, he put forth an executive order that actually allows the Department of Social Services to withhold rental assistance in all units in a property where even only one unit has been found to be in violation of a health department lead violation. And so, those owners are being put on notice that it is not tolerable in our community to allow their properties to be in disrepair and to put the health of children in them at risk. That is working seamlessly. It works on automatic almost now because of the way that it's been constructed and the partners that are committed to making that happen. And I have to say that within the first couple of months of the change from one unit at a time to the entire building, the compliance rate for owners that had been a little slow at getting things fixed and repaired in a timely way changed pretty quickly. And so, when owners have an investment in their property and the investment is at the expense of public dollars, and the public dollars stop, sometimes things happen a lot faster. And that was a great stick strategy that was employed on owners that were a little bit less likely to move forward without the use of a stick. The incentives are great. Offering grants are great. It's challenging for some owners to do that. And some owners just don't respond to incentives at all, and the sticks are become necessary. I have to say that since it's been implemented, it's been less necessary. And, owners are starting to come on board and be more responsive and more prompt at addressing hazards that are found in their units. We still have, Stephanie would call them the dirty dozen, a few owners that we just constantly come up on our radar for inspection, and also are the same ones that come up on code enforcement. So there's a lot that are sort of outstanding for that one group of landlords that are going to be less likely to comply with any kind of an order or fine or other penalty for repairing their property. But for the majority of owners, Everything in compliance has improved with all of the partners working together, with the commitment of our leadership, and with the use of the new executive order to withhold rent in multi-unit properties.
I think that's a great point, Deb, that sometimes we all know change is difficult and that these things are clunky and hard to do, but at some point it does become standard operating procedure, and that program has been unveiled long enough that people, it's just, instead of fighting it, it's like, okay, I just got to do it, and I'm not going to, dragging my feet gets me nowhere.
Right.
So I think that's a really great microcosm for what we're talking about today with the ordinance, that in a couple of years, we're going to look back at this conversation and say, wow, we knew it was going to be hard, but it did become part of standard operating procedure.
And I'm hopeful that the ordinance will also reduce the number of times we have to call upon the district attorney for the owners that really have been negligent, don't respond to fines, don't respond to rent withholding or any other sanction against them for not maintaining their property. That's something that we reserve for owners that are egregious in their negligence of the property. And we know that there have been about 12 owners in our community that have been in some sort of process in front of the DA's office. I'm hoping the ordinance addresses that, because literally, if you think about it, code enforcement is the only entity in all of the ones that we're talking about that has the right and the inherent authority to be in every property in our city. The health department does not have that responsibility or that right. None of the private partners do. Code enforcement, the local municipal code authority, is the one that has the ability to be on top of maintenance and health and safety in every property in our community.
Yeah. Amen. Well, I thought I'd bring on Stephanie. I feel kind of like a journalistic sin that I've kind of buried the headline when talking about this, that, when we talk about the lead group, the lead meetings that we used to have, I in talking to Chris Baker in preparation for the vote on Monday and trying to bring awareness to the situation, I was talking about all the different things that we just mentioned, the DSS, the DSS executive order from the county exec, the DA's effort. But one of the things that, was, top of the list for hopeful changes that we could have was getting the city's federal funding back, which was, a massive boom for this, for the region. At the same time, the county's grant is coming in, between those two, it's between 9 and 10, correct?
I think all in, yeah, but it's north of 9 million, yeah.
North of 9 million, right? So, do you want to talk about, when it went away, how it came back, and that process and everything that went on?
Sure. I'll try to give you the Reader's Digest version. The city of Syracuse was very successful for, I believe, about 18 years in a row, receiving HUD lead dollars. And it's interesting that Deb brought up earlier the naughty word of presumed, and that's how we got into a little trouble when we were inspecting properties. If we were in someone's living room and they all had the same 5 original windows, we would test 2, not all 5, and then HUD said that's a no, you still have to test all of them, even though presumption was actually at the time a taught strategy. So it sort of shifted. I think that was around 2000. I want to say 11, maybe, that it was, you can't presume ever, you have to test every single component. And so that's exactly what we did. We paused our program, we went back in every single unit, retested every component, made sure that those homes were safe and that we had a record of all those tests. But that blip in, pausing the program meant we were unable to secure a grant for a year. And kind of once you're out, it's hard to get back in. These are incredibly competitive funds where maybe only 10 cities at a time will receive dollars. And you can imagine the national need. The city of Syracuse could use all of the money in 1 year's allocation. So to have that level of competition is really difficult. I think at the same time, the grants, the administrative expenses there's just not a lot of coverage for it. So you have to find other resources in order to pay all the staff that are required to do the things Deb talked about, risk assessments, put projects out to bid, work with the contractors to get the work done, make sure the families are safe during construction, make sure you're providing education to landlords and families, getting the word out there. Those funds require an incredible amount of paperwork that you're asking, low and moderate income families to provide. Income information, sometimes blood test information, ownership, insurance, lots and lots and lots of paperwork. The files are very thick in order to just move forward with the construction component. So it's a really complicated process. Am I thrilled that again, if we're picturing the tool belt, that we have that tool at our disposal? Of course. But each grant, even that volume of dollars, will only help, a few hundred units. As we talked about, if we have 66,000 units in the city, that the vast majority were built before 1980. I just don't want to rely too heavily on one tool. But that's a great tool. Maybe it's the Phillips head screwdriver of the tools. But it is just one tool in the toolkit, and it's a complicated program to run. But it's fantastic that both the city and the county have these resources available. I think as all of these things unfold, and I'm so glad to hear the coalition is still getting together and identifying other aspects of the plan that are essential, getting private investment, getting other funding sources involved in this work, making sure we have enough qualified contractors to do this work. And that's what that lead grant also provides, is an incentive for people to stay, keep their certifications up. They have to get lots of training there. If you're a contractor, your insurance goes up. There's all kinds of aspects to it, that are necessary, but, make the program a little harder to participate in and administer. So we got to keep our foot on the gas with all those different financial incentives and tools, as well as the advocacy and the policy. So that holistic approach, is what we need. But I'm thrilled we have the program. Hopefully the city will continue to be competitive as new rounds, and the county as new rounds are available. But I also hope we continue to find ways to, get more resources in the hands, like the GHHI model, and not just sort of put all our eggs in the HUD basket.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think it's also important to note that the HUD basket is just that. It's one tool, and it's a one-time only opportunity for a family to have some needed repair done to their property. It does not solve the problem for the long haul, and paint maintenance is still critical. Even if a person gets a grant and has some repair work done, they still have to keep their eye on paint maintenance and stabilization, and make sure that any surfaces that were not permanently covered by siding or window replacement or something like that, that the paint doesn't start to chip and peel again, because it would need to be again repaired and treated and maintained in an intact condition. So it's really important, because there is a misunderstanding in the community that, I had a HUD grant, so my house is safe. It's safe as soon as the work is done. And then the eye on the ball has to start with watching and monitoring the paint for the long haul.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I talked to so many people when I was working at home headquarters, and they mentioned that, and I said, well, it's remediation, it's not elimination. So just take that into consideration, that there still might be lead hazards in the home.
Yeah, so I usually keep these two around an hour. I've held up your ladies' evenings for about an hour, but before we go, I'd love to hear any, if you want to do a round robin of final thoughts. And first of all, before I do that, I'll probably say it before we leave too, but just how grateful I am for all three of you and your partnership and all your years of work on this. And it feels very bizarre, first of all, to think that I'll be voting on this on a Zoom meeting. It's WebEx, not Zoom, but to be crossing the finish line in my basement from my laptop just feels very strange. But it also feels very strange to not have you guys in the chamber with me, because of everyone's collective work on this. I'd hoped have a pizza party with all our partners or something dorky like that. But no such luck. So I just want to send my gratitude to all three of you, of course, for everything you've done. But Katie, if you have any final thoughts, anything you want to relay?
Well, Joe, and the same goes to you. Thank you so much for all that you've done with this. You really just kept it moving forward, especially when it came to the lead ordinance, and that is so remarkable. So thank you for that. I'd like to say that, the experience of working for the home headquarters with the GHHI Greater Syracuse program was really an amazing experience, and I loved it, and I miss it. I'm glad to continue to see everything moving on. So I'm there in spirit.
Stephanie, any final thoughts for us?
I just want to echo what Katie and Deb said. Thank you so much, Joe. It's been a pleasure having someone not working on this for 20 years just step up, step in, and really galvanize a very awesome cross-section of community members, and having people feel welcome and educated in this issue, so that it does live on and carry on, and that these other aspects of what we still need to do continue to move forward. And I'd just say that from, a housing standpoint, we have a lot of work to do to continue to provide quality, affordable, and decent housing to families in the city of Syracuse, of which this is one critical component. But I think that hopefully the coalition and the groups that have gotten together continue to meet, continue to reach out, continue to invite us all to get together, whether it's for pizza or just socially distanced glass of water, to continue pushing this forward and figuring out, as Deb mentioned, each case is kind of a snowflake, and each one might need a different approach. Like some cases it is appropriate for the district attorney, some cases it's more appropriate for code, some cases it just needs financial incentives or assistance, education. As long as we can keep having those conversations and sharing information, I just think that's critical. So I really hope this is, like on the hopscotch, step one, and we're going to keep throwing that rock forward and jumping for it. So thank you.
Love it. And I just want to give a shout out, as you said, coalition. I don't think we specified also the work of Robin Smith and Frank Ridzi with CNYCF and how awesome they've been. And I hope to have them on in a podcast sometime in the near future to showcase some of the great work they've done, and really, they came in with another $2 million from them, but also, the support and the friendship and their minds and their contribution of everything they've done has been an essential partner that I want to give a shout out before we go to. Final thoughts, Deb, anything you want to leave us with?
Well, I missed the other two legs of the tripod very much. I mean, we were definitely a force to be reckoned with, and your presence and your impact is going to be remembered when we get to the other side of Monday. So thank you for being in it for the long fight. And I want to bring us back just to the beginning where Joe said that none of us working on lead. This work is daily. It's grinding. We do it every day, all day long. We've been on pause for a little bit with lead for the past couple of months out of necessity. And I think that, Joe, thank you for this. This is a great way to begin to unpause the partnership, the policy work, and the primary prevention focus for the community, and get us all back thinking about what's the next thing that we have to work on to continue to move the needle on childhood lead poisoning. So thank you.
Awesome. No, thank you guys. This has been great. Like I said, I wish we were hanging out somewhere in the real world, but I guess that's everybody all the time now. I think I probably started this podcast so I could talk to someone. I want to see strangers. I mean, I love my wife and everything, don't get me wrong, but I think all of us have seen the kitchen and the living room and the basement one too many times in the last few months. So it's good. It's good. I'm seeing your living rooms and your bedrooms now. So I feel it's very cathartic for me and very therapeutic. So No, but we miss you, Katie and Stephanie. Definitely. Well, I mean, Stephanie, I'll still see you with Alan, right? You'll still be around. So
No, I'm supposed to be working on housing stuff, Joe. So keep it up. Keep the communication going. I'm thrilled to see how we can play a role moving forward.
Yeah. So more good adventures to come. Thank you all so much for all your work you've done on this, and to be continued, right?
To be continued. Perfect.
Thank you.
All right. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Right.